The human psyche is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of early experiences, and for many men, the patterns of their adult romantic lives are dictated by the silent echoes of childhood trauma. This phenomenon, often referred to in psychological circles as repetition compulsion, describes the subconscious drive to recreate familiar, albeit painful, dynamics from the past in an attempt to master or resolve them in the present. When a boy experiences specific emotional wounds during his formative years, these experiences do not simply vanish. They settle into the bedrock of his personality, shaping his attachment style, his choice of partners, and his reaction to intimacy. Understanding how these wounds manifest is essential for breaking the cycle of dysfunctional relationships and moving toward a state of emotional health. One of the most pervasive and foundational wounds is that of abandonment. This occurs when a primary caregiver is physically absent, such as through divorce or death, or emotionally unavailable, perhaps due to their own struggles with addiction or mental health. A boy who grows up with a deep seated fear that the people he loves will eventually leave him develops an anxious attachment style that defines his adult interactions. Subconsciously, this man is often drawn to partners who are elusive, inconsistent, or emotionally distant. This choice is not an accident, it is a manifestation of his internal blueprint. By choosing someone who mirrors the parent who left, he provides himself with a subconscious opportunity to fix the original trauma. He believes that if he can just be good enough, successful enough, or attentive enough to make this unavailable person stay, he will finally heal the hole left by his childhood abandonment. However, this often results in a self-fulfilling prophecy where his clinginess and hypervigilance push the partner away, reinforcing his core belief that he is destined to be left alone. Consider a man like Elias, who grew up with a mother who frequently moved in and out of his life. As an adult, Elias finds himself perpetually attracted to women who prioritize their careers or social lives over him, leading him to oscillate between intense devotion and paralyzing fear of loss. Closely related to abandonment but distinct in its execution is the rejection wound. While abandonment is about the fear of someone leaving, rejection is about the fear of not being wanted or accepted for who one truly is. This wound is often inflicted by parents who are overly critical, dismissive, or who only offer conditional love based on performance. For a man carrying a rejection wound, the world feels like a stage where he must constantly audition for the right to be loved. He often develops a chameleon personality, shifting his interests and values to match those of his partner to avoid any possibility of disapproval. He subconsciously attracts partners who are judgmental, high maintenance, or dismissive, as these traits feel familiar and safe to his wounded ego. He seeks validation from the very people least likely to give it, creating a cycle where he is constantly seeking approval but never receiving it. This man often struggles with deep-seated shame, believing that his true self is fundamentally flawed. If a partner does show him genuine, unconditional acceptance, he may actually feel repulsed or suspicious, as it contradicts his internal narrative that he must earn his place in a relationship. When we look further into the architecture of male trauma, the betrayal wound emerges as a significant disruptor of trust. This wound typically stems from a childhood environment where promises were routinely broken, or where the child was forced to witness or participate in deceptions, such as a parent's infidelity or a family secret. A man with a betrayal wound moves through the world with a watchtower mentality. He is hyper vigilant, always scanning for signs of dishonesty or impending treachery. Because he was taught early on that those closest to him cannot be trusted, he subconsciously attracts partners who have a history of instability or who struggle with boundaries. He might find himself in relationships with people who are secretive, which justifies his need to monitor their phones, question their whereabouts, and maintain a level of control that borders on the suffocating. Paradoxically, his lack of trust often creates the very environment of resentment that leads a partner to hide things from him, thus confirming his bias that everyone eventually lies. His relationships are characterized by a test and see dynamic, where he constantly pushes the partner's limits to see if they will break, ironically destroying the peace he claims to desire. Neglect, though quieter than overt abuse or abandonment, leaves a profound mark on a man's capacity for intimacy. This is the wound of the invisible child, the boy who was fed and clothed but whose emotional world was completely ignored. In homes where parents were overwhelmed, indifferent, or simply too busy, a child learns that his needs do not matter and that expressing them is a burden to others. As an adult, this man often struggles with a lack of emotional intelligence and an inability to identify or communicate his own desires. He frequently attracts take charge or even narcissistic partners who dominate the relationship. Because he is used to being secondary, he finds comfort in a partner who takes up all the emotional space, as it allows him to remain hidden. He becomes the nice guy who never complains. But this silence is often a mask for a deep, simmering resentment. He may feel like a ghost in his own life, settling for crumbs of affection and convincing himself that he doesn't need more. His relationships often lack true depth because he has never learned how to bring his full emotional self to the table, fearing that if he did, it would be met with the same chilling indifference he experienced as a child. In environments where life was chaotic, unpredictable, or governed by a tyrannical caregiver, the control and powerlessness wound takes root. A boy who feels completely powerless in his home environment, perhaps due to a parent's alcoholism or explosive temper, grows into a man who is obsessed with maintaining a sense of agency. This can manifest in two ways. He may become the micromanager, a man who needs to control every aspect of his partner's life, from finances to social interactions, as a way to ward off the terror of his childhood helplessness. Alternatively, he may become extremely passive, attracting partners who are domineering and controlling, essentially recreating the dynamic of his youth where someone else held all the power. In the first scenario, he attracts partners who are often vulnerable or lost, as they are easier to manage and less likely to challenge his authority. In the second, he finds himself with authoritarian types who make all the decisions, leaving him in a familiar state of suppressed anger. For a man like Adrian, whose childhood was a minefield of his father's unpredictable moods, adult relationships are a battleground for safety. He equates control with survival, and any sign of his partner's independence is perceived as a direct threat to his internal stability. A particularly heavy burden for many men is the worthlessness wound, often tied to a core belief that they have no intrinsic value outside of what they can provide or achieve. This often stems from being raised in a household where love was a transaction. If the boy got good grades, won the game, or helped around the house, he was good. If he failed, he was invisible or ridiculed. This man grows up to be a high achiever or a provider who believes that his bank account, his status, or his utility to his partner is his only tether to affection. He subconsciously attracts partners who are takers or who have significant needs that he can fill. He feels most secure when he is fixing someone else's life, as it provides him with a sense of purpose and a temporary reprieve from his feelings of inadequacy. However, this creates a toxic imbalance. He often feels exploited, yet he is terrified of stopping his service because he fears that without his utility, he is unlovable. He accepts breadcrumbs of love because he doesn't believe he deserves the whole loaf. His worth is externalized, leaving him vulnerable to devastating identity crises if the relationship or his ability to provide ever falters. Finally, we encounter the self-reliant wound, often referred to as hyper-independence. This is the result of a child being forced to grow up too fast, often taking on the role of the man of the house or the caregiver for his own parents. Having learned that he can only truly depend on himself, he develops a thick emotional armor. In adulthood, he prides himself on not needing anyone. He is the lone wolf who remains emotionally detached even in long-term relationships. He subconsciously attracts partners who are pursuers, people who are anxious and needy, who constantly try to break through his walls. This dynamic serves a dual purpose for him. On one hand, the partner's pursuit makes him feel desired. On the other, their neediness confirms his belief that other people are too much and that he is safer staying behind his fortifications. He often pushes partners away the moment they get too close, citing a need for space or freedom, when in reality, he is terrified of the vulnerability that comes with interdependence. For a man like Lucas, who raised his younger siblings while his parents worked multiple jobs, asking for help feels like a personal failure. His relationships are characterized by a cold distance that eventually leaves his partners feeling starved for connection. leading to an inevitable breakup that reinforces his belief that he is better off alone. Each of these wounds acts as a filter through which a man views the world and his potential partners. They are not just historical footnotes, they are active, living blueprints that dictate attraction and behavior. Healing begins with the painful process of awareness, recognizing that the types he is attracted to and the patterns he repeats are not products of bad luck, but are the outward expressions of internal trauma. By tracing these adult behaviors back to their childhood origins, a man can begin to dismantle the defensive structures he built as a boy. This requires a profound shift from a victim mindset to one of radical responsibility, where he acknowledges that while he was not responsible for the wounds inflicted upon him, he is entirely responsible for the healing of those wounds. Through this process of psychological analysis and emotional work, it becomes possible to transition from a life of repetition to a life of choice, allowing for the development of healthy, secure, and truly intimate relationships.